Were you someone who dreamt of your wedding long before you met the one? Did you picture the venue, the flowers, the ceremony, maybe how you would look on the big day? If your answer is yes, you're not alone. For hundreds of years, getting married was seen as a rite of passage. While this designation is still equally as important to some, for others, it's fallen far down on the list of priorities. Richard Fry, a senior economist at the Pew Research Center, has studied these trends for many years. He says that Americans ages 25 to 54 are much less likely to be married today compared to previous generations.
In 1990, in that age group, 29% were unpartnered. Today, it's 38%. So a growing share of prime-age adults are neither married nor have an unmarried partner. Is this just delayed partnership or is it foregone partnership? If you had asked me 15 years ago, I would have said we don't know. It could be just delayed. I didn't know if it was foregone. I think now we've got enough data that there is pretty good evidence that for a significant piece of that 38%, it will be foregone.
According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the average age for marriage for men is 30 years old, and for women, 28 years old. These averages are significantly older than in past decades. Fry believes that one big contributor is a major shift in gender roles in America.
Women have had growing proportions of them are in the labor market. Generally, as a general statement, their earnings have risen. Women are increasingly in the nation's kind of good jobs and managerial and professional jobs. And so with their growing sort of labor market success and economic independence, they simply don't need a partnership in order to be economically self-sufficient, as used to be the case.
And that independence is showing up in how women are choosing to raise their families, too. Today, there's far less stigma on non-traditional family structures, such as having kids outside of marriage or even without a partner at all. In fact, according to the CDC, for the first time in U.S. history, women over 40 are having more babies than teenagers.
It's much less stigmatized than it's ever been to be a single mother by choice, right? So there are women, a growing number of women, it's still a small number, but it's a growing number of women who are choosing to be mothers, single mothers by choice. Especially in urban centers, we're seeing a lot of people deciding that not necessarily finding a life partner, one life partner who seems like the perfect person to start a family with doesn't mean that you don't get to have children, right? They can make those decisions without that. We see a lot of women freezing their eggs, right? And then having that as an option later on to go back to if because there is a little bit of a biological clock issue, right, on that as opposed to on marriage.
That's Dinah Hannaford, Associate Professor of Anthropology at the University of Houston. While both of these factors have played into falling marriage rates, both Hannaford and Fry are noticing another major change: the value people place on marriage. Though some singles are actively looking for a partner, others are content living life solo.
My colleagues sort of have asked American adults what things are necessary to have, quote unquote, a fulfilling life. And 71% will say it's extremely or very important to have a career or job that I enjoy. 61% will say it's extremely or very important to have close friends. Well, where does marriage stand on this? Only 23% of adults said it's extremely or very important to be married to have a fulfilling life. I think marriage is not as highly esteemed or valued as it once was compared to, career and other aspects of life.
In particular, women are prioritizing their friendships. For some, developing strong, lasting friendships is more important than finding a lifelong partner.
A lot of women are thinking about female friendship as the center of their emotional lives, which means that though they might want to have sexual partnerships with men or other kinds of partnerships with men, that they don't have to think of themselves as being alone if they're unmarried, right? Because there are lots of ways to feel like you're in community and in various forms of living arrangements or social support, mutual aid, all these kinds of things with friends instead of with romantic partners.
On top of this, she believes that more young women today are rethinking what it means to be a wife. For couples with more traditional views on gender norms, this title of wife may come with a whole new set of added responsibilities.
I think a real central question to all of this is about reproductive labor, which is all the work that's unremunerated that happens to make a family or a household function, right? And who we think should be doing that work and who generally does that work, whether or not we think they should be doing it. This is not just about cleaning toilets and making meals, right? But this includes things like making plans with wider circles of friends, doing what's called kin work, writing to grandma on her birthday, right? All these kinds of things are roles that generally women have done for free in family systems. And so you can imagine how nice it would be to take someone on who's going to do a lot of that labor for you rather than living alone and having to do it yourself, right? But when we think about having to take on somebody else's labor, right, doing that labor for another person, maybe that's not as advantageous. So I think reproductive labor is like a really important concept to understand, to think about why these trends might be happening.
Lastly, Hannaford points out that all of the negative news lately also feeds into these viewpoints.
I think there's an increasing feeling, especially among the younger generations, teens and people in their 20s too. This is a really urgent time to think about the future in a negative way, right? We have all this knowledge about impending climate change and what the future of this planet's going to look like. It's a time of great economic precarity too. I think people who are in their teens and 20s don't necessarily imagine that a traditional future of I'll just work hard and then I'll be able to afford a house and the means with which to support a family, right? Those kinds of foundational ideas, American dreams, we might say, aren't necessarily seeming as accessible. And so people are thinking of all kinds of alternatives to that really narrow picture of what adulthood looks like.
And it's not only people of marriage age who are feeling this way. It's trickling down to kids and teens, too. According to a poll by the nonpartisan nonprofit organization, the Survey Center on American Life, significantly fewer Gen Zers have been in romantic relationships compared to other generations. So what does this mean for the future? For one, fewer people will have children, which may lead to some unintended consequences.
A growing proportion of our nation's older adults, 60 and older, a growing proportion of them are going to be never married and also childless. And, typically, how do we care for our older adults? What is their support as their physical needs change and they age? Basically, in America, largely we rely on kin, on family, on spouses and partners and children. They largely get the burden and joys of caregiving for older adults. And so seems to me that this unpartnership trend, to the extent, especially if they don't have children, we're going to have a growing older adults who, where are the kin that are going to sort of care for them, given the way, in America at least, that we take care of our nation's seniors. So that's kind of my broader concern about why singledom and childlessness could potentially be a problem going forward.
With a growing number of the population unmarried and or without children, there will need to be a shift in social structures to provide care for people without family. While this may look different, it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. While some stories on falling marriage rates have framed this situation as a crisis, Hannaford invites listeners to see it from a different perspective.
I think there are ways we can think about that in a different way, as this being a new evolution of what social life can look like, what community can look like, and what social reproduction can look like too, how we interact with other people and find community might be changing. And I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing, right? I think we hear a lot of, anytime there's any demographic change, we often tend to think of it first as a big crisis. But I think there are ways that we can think of this with a more optimistic standpoint, that this might evolve into really exciting new formations of what a healthy, happy, connected, engaged social life might look like.
To find out more about Richard Fry, Dinah Hannaford, and all our featured guests, visit viewpointsradio.org. For more behind the scenes, check out Viewpoints Radio on X, Facebook, and Instagram. This segment was written and produced by Grace Galanti. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Our studio manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson.